Well, hello there. It's so great to be back. Oh my goodness. We are continuing on with our talk about stress. Yes, we are. I am really excited about the upcoming episodes, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. I don't know if you remember, back in the day, we had a company and we still have the company. Actually, the name of our company is still MindBodyMarriage. We just do business as the Fit Collective. Do you remember MindBodyMarriage? Okay. So, couple things. Yes, a play on words, right? When your mind is married to your body, mind-body marriage, right? Mind-body connection, but also relationships. That's what we're going to be talking about. Here's the cool part. We're going to be talking about stress and relationships. And we're going to take it even one step further. We're going to actually be talking about the stress types that you learned about in episode 2. And we're going to go very in depth. Well, okay, I'm going to be honest with you. We're going to go somewhat in depth on all the different ways that these inner mixings, these relationship matrices play out. Okay, so this week, we're going to be just doing a brief overview on what's to come and why this is important. Okay, then we're going to follow up with some episodes. And this is where it gets fun. Okay, and also you're probably going to want to take notes. Okay, because we are going to go through what happens when you have different stress types that are both stressed out. What happens to the relationship? What happens to the team? Then we're going to dive into what happens when both relationships or both the stress types are regulated and they're not stressed. What happens then? Okay. And then we're going to dive into what if one person is stressed and the other person is regulated? What happens with the dynamics there? All right, so we're going to create all different scenarios. All right, remember, 6 stress types: assertive, isolation, control, validation, impulsivity, and catastrophizing. So remember, there's going to be a lot of combinations. And not only is there going to be a lot of combinations, but then there's the combinations of, well, what if the assertive is stressed? And what if the isolating type is not stressed? What happens then? There's so many different scenarios. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction here is because in order to make this a little bit more palatable and a little bit easier to grasp, we actually have to talk about a couple of concepts. Okay. I don't like to talk about the characteristics of the stress types in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So the way I'm going to refer to them as stressed and not stressed. Okay. What we have to know in order to conceptualize the relationship matrix is we have to know what happens when a certain stress type is stressed. So what do they do? And then what happens, right, when a certain stress type is not stressed? What do they do? We want to evaluate this because it's going to give us a really, really good hint on what happens in relationships. Now, to keep this simple, I'm going to start off by talking about a single relationship, meaning 2 people. However, that's not usually how it plays out. That's like putting 2 people in a glass bubble or a glass jar, right? Where there's no other outside influence. There's typically not a one-on-one relationship, right? I mean, there is and there isn't, right? Now, let's just think of a marriage. Okay, so you're married and you're also married to their family too. Or maybe you're not. A lot of times you are. So what I'm saying is, imagine, or I know you can imagine, but this is how complicated relationships can get. This is how relationships can go south. This is also how relationships can improve. This is how teams can be either strong and functioning or completely dysfunctional. And so, again, today is all about noting really what happens with each type in stress and also in regulation. Once we know these things, we'll be able to pair the pairs in a way and make observations and also hypotheses on what will happen within that relationship. When you really start understanding the different interactions, you can then start to add more parties to the party. Okay, so for example, if we're looking at an assertive type and an assertive type in one relationship, we can evaluate what happens when they're both stressed. We can evaluate when they are both regulated. We can evaluate when one is stressed and one is regulated. Okay, but now throw into the party another two people, and maybe they're both isolation types. All right. Well, now you have dynamics between assertive, and isolation. Okay. And I made that easy. But what happens when you have assertive type in a relationship with a validation type, and then two more people join the party, and there's a control in there, and there's an impulsive type in there, and then more people join the party, and then what happens? Okay. So if we don't keep it simple, this can get very complicated. And that's probably one of the reasons why there's not a lot of talk of this. Okay, I think it's fascinating and I am really excited. I'm excited to have created this and I am excited to do research on this. And we're in the very beginning baby phases of all of this. All right, so let's just talk about kind of getting acquainted once again with the stress types. And then what happens when they're stressed? What are their main characteristics when they're stressed? And then what are their main characteristics when they're regulated? Again, I'm not calling them strengths and weaknesses. I'm calling them what I'm calling them, stressed and not stressed. The other thing I want to add for the stress types, what we tend to do when we're stressed, that very thing tends to stress us out more. So I give the example of I take on a lot of qualities of impulsivity, all right, even though my main stress type is validation. With impulsivity, the biggest thing is that we don't believe that a pause can happen because it is so uncomfortable in our body to take a pause. We do not like any delay. And again, the reasoning is because the discomfort of there being a delay. Okay. So think about it. If you never delay and you have a great sense of creativity, that's one of the big characteristics of impulsive types. You might go ahead and create a whole bunch of things because you didn't pause to think about what actually needed to be created. And now your actions completely exhausted you because now, and this actually happened to me. So when I get excited about something, I'll go ahead and make a program. Actually, old Allie would make a program. I don't do it anymore. In fact, I actually love how deliberate the programs in our Fit Collective are now. I'd say about 5 years ago. Okay, I had a lot of things we tried, and it was really fun and really creative and stressful. Okay, because just as much as my response to the stress was my response to the stress, it also created more stress. So those are the two really key things I want to point out. All right, so let's start working through the types. If you haven't taken the stress quiz yet, you're going to want to go to show notes, click on the link to take your stress type. This is our validated quiz that will give you your dominant stress type. And I want to remind you that you will take on other qualities of the stress types. This is just the one that you predominantly go towards, and it has to do with your environment, nurture, nature, your genetics. It has to go with a whole bunch of different things. The way that you grew up, the way that you handled stress when you were really young. So there's a lot of different lenses, and we're going to talk about the lenses in future episodes. But for now, we're going to stick right here. So let's talk about assertive. Okay, so assertive stress types under stress are going to act before they do anything else. Now, a lot of people say, well, wait, I thought that was impulsivity. Okay, it's because the motivation is different. So with assertive types, the things that stress them out and trigger them is if they feel invalidated, okay, or the other thing is if they sense incompetence. Well, why? Okay, so if they sense incompetence, that feels out of control to them, so they have to take over quickly. They have to act fast. And the example I give is a doctor goes to a code, they're an assertive type. They know they have to put a line in the patient. They put their gloves on, they're ready for the line, and the assistant drops the line. And essentially, before they can think, before they can feel, they just act. They go to the cart themselves, they get a line, they put the line in, and then they just prove to themselves that nobody else can do it, only they can do it. So they have this kind of running line that they have to be kind of aggressive and assertive to get things done right. All right. So that's what happens under stress. When they are regulated, they are very decisive. They are great leaders. Okay, they know what they want and they know how to make a decision. That's an advantage. Okay, that's a huge advantage. And to be honest with you, that's a huge advantage. In a code, they got to get the line themselves and do it. What happens though? Well, there will be team breakdown most likely. Okay, so it may serve what it needs to serve, and can we do it better? And that's why this relationship talk is so important. So I'm going to start off by going through each type in that way. I'm going to talk about what happens under stress, and then I'm going to talk about what happens when they're regulated. Okay, and then I'm going to give some examples on kind of what you may see, which will lead us into our future episodes when we talk about the different stress types in their regulated states, in their stress states, in their mixed states. Okay? All right, so isolation stress type. The thing that really triggers them is emotional vulnerability. They do not want to be seen as weak. So they become very good at doing everything by themselves quietly. Okay? They, again, if somebody else shows emotional vulnerability, that makes them uncomfortable, yet they're intrigued because that feels so foreign to them. And when something is very different than us, right, we're kind of interested in it. So the other thing about the isolation type is that when they isolate, again, stresses them out because they feel alone. And humans, we're not meant to be completely alone. Stressful. Okay. Now, here's the good thing. All right. So in a regulated state, types that like to isolate are actually very productive and self-sufficient. So you can tell them a sentence on what you're kind of looking for, and they can come back with a completed project without asking one question. Okay. So they're very good at kind of running with things. Okay. So they are independent team members and they're able to really contribute. Okay. All right. When we go to control, so control stress type, what is very triggering for them is when expectations are not met. Okay. And this can be anywhere, it can show up anywhere. So let's say that you're at work and your colleague is supposed to relieve your shift at 8 p.m. and they don't get there till 8:15. The control type is going to be so dysregulated, okay? Because control, we have trouble with flexibility. Okay, so it's the flexibility piece that's really hard. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because the strength is that we as control types are very organized. Okay, so highly efficient team members, because we're able to organize things in a way, whether they're complicated or simple, but maybe we can organize things in a way and also be able to prioritize things and set expectations. Now, the work is going to be able for control types to be more flexible and to make sure that the expectations we're setting are realistic. Okay? Because what happens is with control, they're very likely to set unrealistic expectations, and then that leads to more stress because the expectations aren't met. Okay? Perfect so far? Okay. So, impulsivity. So, impulsive types, super stressful and triggering with any kind of pause. So, you'll notice that if you think of impulsivity in general, like, so in impulsivity or an impulsive personality trait, this happens in my family all the time. We interrupt each other. We all interrupt each other, and we know we're doing it, and it's really a bad habit, to be honest, because we now know and we're aware and we can reprogram that and we're getting better. So think about it. Why do we do that? Because the pause feels so uncomfortable. Okay. When the pause feels so uncomfortable, guess what happens? We usually act, but it's different than the assertive. The assertive is trying to regain control. Okay, they feel so uncomfortable because it feels out of control, whereas the impulsive type feels so uncomfortable because there's white space. They don't like that space at all. Really uncomfortable. Okay. Now, the flip side, in a regulated state, Impulsive types are extremely creative. They are going to come up with outside the box solutions. Not only will they come up with these outside the box solutions, but when they're regulated, this is really important because they have to be regulated for this. These are the people that can generate the ideas and when they're regulated, get it done. Impulsive types who are dysregulated or stressed might come up with the idea and then they can't follow through. Okay, so that's a really important point. So again, super creative, can get it done, and again, is going to, when regulated, push the project along. Okay, catastrophizing. So for catastrophizing, under stress, it's when something that is a potentially risky situation comes up, okay, and they go worst case scenario. They think of the worst case scenario and they're pretty sure that that's going to happen. So they think of all the possible things that can happen and they're less likely to think about the most probable thing that will happen. Okay. Now, on the flip side, the really great part about all of this with catastrophizing is that they are phenomenal problem solvers. Phenomenal. Fantastic. Okay. So let's put a dysregulated team together. Okay. And I'm talking about teams because at the end of the day, whether you are at work or at home, you are probably operating as a team. All right. So when we talk about assertive dysregulation, we're talking about taking action before thinking at all. And again, it's because feeling out of control feels so uncomfortable. Okay. So you have somebody feeling out of control. Then you have your isolation type, where under stress, they don't want to show any weakness. So what do? So you have your assertive type that is standing by the code cart to grab a new line. You have your isolation person that's standing behind the code cart, ducking. Okay. Your control person, this is your person that, again, under stress is usually going to be disappointed because expectations weren't met. So this might be potentially somebody who's assisting the whole code scenario, and they expected that somebody would give the lead the line and the line would go in, and that didn't happen. And so expectations weren't met. And so they can start to panic a little bit. Okay. Then you have your impulsivity type who, again, is thinking outside the box on what we can do. However, they're probably not going to be the one who's leading because they're not overpowering the assertive. So it might just be noise in the background because they're giving all these ideas and nobody can think about ideas right now because everybody's stressed. And when we're stressed, we can't really think that well. Okay, so I'm painting this picture. And then you have your catastrophizing type who's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. We're going to have an M&M on this, going worst case scenario. Who is supposed to lead here? What are we going to do? You now have a completely dysregulated team. Okay. So most likely, if everybody's dysregulated, the person that can take action the quickest, which is probably going to be your assertive type, is going to just get it done. And once again, prove to themselves that they're the only ones that can do it. Okay. So that whole scenario is going to promote that all of those stress types believe what they believe about themselves. So the assertive type believes that they need to get it done. The isolated type believes that they better not be seen. The control type is going to clearly show that this is disappointing and that this didn't happen as planned. Did I miss the validation? Oh my goodness, I missed the validation type, which is me. The validation type is going to be the number one helper, okay, but is going to literally be so stressed out because they're questioning every little thing they're doing because nobody's externally validating them under stress. All right. That's interesting. I went past the whole validation thing. I got to back up for a minute. Validation, okay, under stress, seeking external compliments, okay? When they're regulated, they create harmony. Okay, so if you have somebody that is a validation type and they're trying to assist maybe the assertive type, if the assertive type is saying to them, okay, perfect, great, yep, bring it over here, thank you so much, okay, awesome, and they're getting that validation, they're going to do really well under stress. But if they're not getting that, they're literally going to be ineffective because they're going to be questioning themselves the whole time. Okay, so going back to the whole scenario, assertive type is probably going to be taking action. Isolative type's probably going to be hiding. Control type is going to be talking a lot about was supposed to happen didn't happen. Validation type is going to be trying to help because they want to be seen and they want people to know that they were part of it. Okay, but they're not really going to be sure on what they're doing because nobody's there validating them under stress. Impulsivity type is going to be in the background, probably trying to construct another way to save a patient in the background, but they're stressed, so they're not actually able to put those ideas into motion. And then the catastrophic type is going to do one or two things. They're going to be in their head, or they're going to be telling everybody how this is a terrible situation. And that happens in real life. Let's be honest. We all have been, maybe it wasn't at work, but we have been in that scenario. And I bet you right now, if you thought back to it, you could probably pinpoint who had what stress type. Right? Okay. Let's take the flip side. Let's take a regulated state. Let's take the same scenario. Let's take a resuscitation. You're in the hospital. You get called. Okay. Now, you're the observer, so you're not involved in this and you're observing what's happening. Okay. Assertive type shows up. They get their gloves on. They're ready to go. They clearly and slowly and in a non-scary way, okay, say exactly what they need. I'd like a line prepped, draw up some epi, let's get the code cart, call anesthesia. They got it in a clear, alarming tone. And this takes practice, okay? Because it's not natural that we're all just going to be able to regulate our emotions in stress. And that's why we have the program now, Stress RX, because that's what we're training people to do. Okay, so assertive type comes down. So basically, they've taken Stress RX, they know what to do. They show up. Remember what I said, the strengths. They're decisive and they're good leaders. Okay, so that's going to calm everybody in the room right there by them showing up calmly and saying what needs to happen. Already, it's going to relieve the whole room. So if you're an assertive type, realize your tone matters. And not everybody is really gifted at knowing how they come across. And it's uncomfortable to talk about. And so often we don't talk about it, but this is why we're talking about it. Okay. Isolated person. Okay. They come down. They know what their job is. They know what they have to get done to assist. They're okay not being the main character. And they know what they have to do to get it done. So guess what? They're going to hear the order from the assertive type and they're going to go over. And guess what they're going to do? By themselves, they're going to drop the epi. They're going to get the line prepped. They're going to call anesthesia. Or they're going to have somebody, they're going to delegate that and have somebody call anesthesia. Because they can get it done. They can take the calm order and they can perform. Okay? Your control type. Expectations. Well, guess what? Assertive type already showed up under control, expectation met. Isolative type, somebody's already working on the line. In the control person's mind, everything's working perfectly. They're probably going to be the person that now goes over and they're the one recording the code, right? The recorder. They're watching for the things to happen sequentially in an order if that's expected. Okay? They're going to be really effective here. Why? They're going to keep people in order. So if anesthesia doesn't come, guess what? Hey, can you call anesthesia again? They're going to keep things in order. The control type regulated. Okay, validation type. There's harmony. Okay, because the validation type is regulated. So the validation type is going to be able to create that calm. Okay, because they're calm. They're going to create that calm. And guess what? When they're calm, they don't even need the external validation as much. They're going to be the jack of all trades. They can jump in and do the line if needed. They can also drop the epi if needed. They can also call anesthesia if needed. They can give people positive reinforcement. They might be the people that are pulling the family out of the room to tell them, listen, we got this. We're going to have you sit out here. Can I get you something? Just give the doctors and nurses and medical team some time to work here. We got this. And so whatever is said, they might be comforting and creating harmony for that family even, okay? Because they're regulated, all right? Impulsivity type, all right? They're there knowing that they can make anything happen probably quicker than anybody and they can execute and get it done when they're regulated. So they're on standby. They're kind of like the assistant on standby, ready to help with whatever the assertive says. So they might not be doing anything in particular because remember, when they're regulated, they will allow white space. They don't feel like they need to do anything. Okay? Super important, right? Because guess what? Impulsive types are super creative. So let's say that maybe, I don't know, something isn't working right. And you have your impulsive type who is on standby and they're regulated. They might be able to solve a problem in crisis. They probably will, in fact. Okay? And then catastrophizing. Okay, when regulated, they've thought of all case scenarios. So they're likely in the background thinking ahead of everybody else. Okay, they're not going to worst case scenario because, again, everything's regulated, which means there's going to be a good outcome here, or the best outcome that can be is going to happen. So what they're doing is they're actually sitting there thinking through all the scenarios, okay, so that they are prepared. But prepared in a way where if something has to happen or they have to give a new idea, they're able to communicate it very clearly. All right, so we just painted pictures of two very different teams. A completely stressed out and dysregulated team, and then a very regulated team. All right, so let me ask you. We now have the code, it's run, everything goes as if. You have the two scenarios. You have the dysregulated team and the regulated team. Okay. Let's say in both scenarios, patient makes it and does well. They get the patient to the ICU. Patient is fine in both scenarios. Dysregulated scenario, patient makes it. Regulated scenario, patient makes it. What team was more successful? How do we measure success? Are they both equally successful because the goal is to make sure that the patient makes it out safely and does well? It's one of the goals, sure. But there's other goals we really have to consider. So when we start talking about burnout in medicine and feeling underappreciated and feeling like there's a toxic culture, toxic environment, we're talking about the dysregulated teams. We're not talking about the regulated teams. So let me ask you, this is the question. Outcome's the same, patient's going to survive. What scenario do you choose? What team do you want to be on? I think we all know the answer. Okay, and it's available and possible. The issue is that everybody on the team needs training. We all have to be aware of how we show up when we're stressed and how we show up when we're regulated. We have to have strategies to be regulated more often than not. So we can't just expect to be regulated when there's a code once in a while. We have to practice regulation every single day so that we can train our neuroplasticity that when we are in a very high, intense, stressful, high stakes situation, we can turn on the new behavior to remain regulated. It's possible. We see it. It's happening in medicine. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with, what team do you choose? All right. And if you choose the regulated team, I want you to come back next week because we're going to be talking more in depth about what happens when we have more relationships like this happening. So we're going to keep this conversation going. All right. If you're loving this work, this is exactly the type of programming we're going to be doing in Transform 10. All right. We are going all in on the leaky valve, and I'll explain the leaky valve. Varicose vein up high. You also have a bunch of varicose veins in your calf. You could just do sclerotherapy, but that's really not going to do anything because guess what? The valve is still leaking. If we remain emotionally dysregulated, we are leaky valves. Okay? So how do we cure the leaky valve? We get ourselves regulated through stress management. Okay? Then what happens? Those varicose veins, those leakages down below, they get to seal up with just a little bit of an intervention, a little bit of sclerotherapy, okay? A little bit, not as hard as if the leaky valve was open, gets to heal. Everything gets to heal. All right, my friends? So you want to check out thefitcollective.com/transform, okay? Now, this is our program that we've designed, highly made up of women doctors. If you are a male physician out there, if you're in healthcare or you want something more, We do all of this type of coaching also in a one-on-one setting. Okay. So you can also check that out, thefitcollective.com/private-coaching. And we have some amazing coaches with the Fit Collective that are trained in Stress RX, and you can actually work with them personally. All right, my friends, until next time, we'll talk soon.